There is a man alone at a river crossing. It is the middle of the night. He has sent everyone he loves across the water ahead of him, his wives, his children, his servants, everything he owns. And now he stands on the far bank with nothing between him and the dark. He is terrified. His brother is coming in the morning with 400 men, and the last time they saw each other, he had stolen everything worth taking and run. That was 20 years ago. He has been running ever since. And then someone grabs him. Not metaphorically, not in a vision. In the dark, at a river crossing, in the middle of the night, someone takes hold of him and they wrestle until the sun comes up. And by the time the light arrives, he is wounded in a way that will never fully heal. And he has a name he did not have when the darkness started. We will get there, but I need you to notice something first. Because this is not the only midnight in the Bible where something like this happens. It is not even close to the only one. There is a midnight in Egypt where an entire nation is liberated, not at sunrise, but at the darkest point of the night. There is a midnight in a Roman prison where two beaten men start singing and the foundations shake. And there is a midnight in a garden where the Son of God falls on his face in the dirt and makes the decision that saves the world, alone, while his closest friends sleep 30 yards away. 4 midnights, across both testaments, across centuries of history. One pattern. God does not wait for sunrise. He does not wait for the circumstances to improve, for the darkness to lift, for things to be easier. He shows up at midnight, specifically, deliberately, repeatedly, at the point of maximum darkness, and he does something that cannot happen any other way. This is the story of what he does there. His name is Jacob, and if you know anything about Jacob, you know that name is the problem. In Hebrew, the name Yaakov comes from the word for heel, ekev. He grabbed his twin brother Esau's heel coming out of the womb, the second-born trying to pull himself into first place, and the name stuck. Not just as a family story, but as a description. Because Jacob spent his entire life doing exactly what his name said he would, grasping, maneuvering, taking what was not quite his by means that were not quite right. He tricked his dying father into giving him the blessing that belonged to Esau. He ran when Esau found out. He worked for his uncle Laban for 20 years, was cheated and manipulated, and managed to come out ahead through a combination of cunning and providence that is difficult to fully untangle. He has spent his whole life surviving by his wits and his willingness to grab. And now he is at the ford of the Jabbok, in the middle of the night, and Esau is coming in the morning. He has sent gifts ahead, flocks and herds and servants, wave after wave of them, trying to soften whatever is coming. He has prayed, genuinely and desperately, in a way the text records with unusual specificity. And then he has done the only thing left to do. He has sent everyone across and stayed behind alone. Stay with me, because what happens next is one of the strangest passages in all of Scripture. A man grabs him in the dark. No introduction, no warning, no explanation, just contact, and they wrestle all night. The text gives us no indication that Jacob knows who this is. He is fighting for his life in the dark against someone he cannot see clearly, and he will not let go, and neither will the other man. And this goes on until the eastern sky begins to lighten. When the man sees he cannot overpower Jacob, he touches the socket of Jacob's hip and wrenches it, just touches it. One touch, and Jacob's hip is out of joint, and he is fighting on one leg in the dark at a river crossing with dawn coming, and he still will not let go. The man says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And then the question comes. The question that is not really a question, because the one asking already knows the answer. What is your name? In the ancient Hebrew world, your name was not just what people called you, it was what you were. It carried your nature, your history, your story. To ask someone's name was to ask them to account for themselves. To say your name out loud was to confess who you had been. Jacob says his name, Jacob, the heel grabber, the supplanter, the one who spent his whole life taking things that were not quite his. He says it out loud, in the dark, to a stranger at a river crossing. and it is the most honest thing he has ever said in his life. And the man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob. Your name will be Israel." Israel. Yisrael. The one who struggles with God and prevails.
Not the heel grabber, not the deceiver, not the one defined by what he took, the one defined by what he would not let go of, even broken, even wounded, even fighting on one leg in the dark. He would not let go until the blessing came. Jacob names the place Peniel. In Hebrew, it means, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared. He limps away into the sunrise. The wound is permanent. The limp stays with him for the rest of his life, a physical reminder carved into his body of the night he spent at the river. But he carries something else out of that darkness too, a name he could not have received any other way, a name that required the breaking to arrive. Here is what most people miss. Jacob does not receive the new name before the wrestling. He does not receive it because he had a quiet moment or said the right prayer or presented himself at a reasonable hour in a reasonable condition. He receives it broken, at a river crossing, in the middle of the night, holding on to something he cannot even see clearly. God did not ask him to clean himself up first. God grabbed him in the dark. You may be in a season that feels like a river crossing at midnight. You may have sent everything you love ahead of you across the water, and now you are standing on the bank, alone, with morning still hours away, and something has grabbed you in the dark, and you do not know what it is or where it came from or when it will be over. What happened to Jacob suggests this: you are not being destroyed. You are being renamed. But the midnight is not finished yet. Centuries after Jacob limps away from the Jabbok, an entire nation is about to be liberated, and God chooses midnight to do it. The setting is Egypt. The Israelites have been enslaved for 400 years, 4 centuries of brick and mortar and whips and the systematic erasure of a people's identity. Pharaoh has tried to kill their sons at birth. He has worked them until they broke and then worked the next generation. And now, after 9 plagues that have torn through the most powerful empire on earth, one final thing is coming. The worst thing. The thing that will finally break Pharaoh open. Moses has already told them what to do. Find a lamb without defect. Slaughter it at twilight. Take the blood and put it on the door frames, the top, the 2 sides. Roast the lamb and eat it in full traveling clothes, sandals on, staff in hand, ready to move, and wait. The Hebrew word for what they are waiting for is chatzot, midnight. Specifically, chatzot means the exact middle of the night, not roughly midnight, not sometime in the early hours, but the precise mathematical center of the darkness, the point equidistant from sunset and sunrise, the moment of maximum dark. Exodus 12, verse 29. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. Not at dawn, not when the sky began to lighten and things felt possible again. At midnight, at the worst possible hour, at the point where the night is as dark as it is going to get, and the morning is still as far away as it has ever been. Pharaoh rises in the night. Egypt rises in the night. Josephus, writing in his Antiquities, describes the Passover night with the kind of detail that makes the scale of it land. A wailing that moves through every household in the most powerful nation on earth, because there is not a house without someone dead. The empire that enslaved a people for 4 centuries is undone between sunset and sunrise. And in the Israelite homes, the ones with blood on the doorframes, silence, safety. The angel passes over. The lamb has already bled. Liberation is already moving. Pay attention to this detail. The Israelites do not walk out of Egypt at a sensible hour. They do not wait for a reasonable time to travel. They leave in the night, because Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron in the dark and tells them to go. Now, tonight, take your flocks and your herds and leave. The liberation begins before sunrise. It begins at the moment God chooses, which is the moment of maximum darkness, which is midnight. The Mishnah records that the Passover Seder was structured around Hatzot, around midnight, as the turning point of the night. The rabbis understood something about that word. The middle of the darkness is not just a time marker. It is a theological statement. God does not liberate at the moment when liberation seems most possible.
He liberates at the moment when it seems most impossible. That is the Passover. That is the second midnight. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the pattern does not stop in the Old Testament. It crosses the centuries and lands in a Roman prison in a city called Philippi. And what happens there will ask you something that the first two midnights have only been preparing you for. Paul and Silas are in the worst part of the prison. Not just imprisoned, they have been stripped of their clothes in a public square, beaten with rods, and thrown into the inner cell. The inner cell is not a room with a window. It is the deepest, darkest part of a Roman prison. No light, no ventilation, no comfort. Their feet are fastened in stocks. They cannot move. The Acts of the Apostles records what they do next with a precision that should stop you. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. The Greek word is hymnoun, present active participle. It does not mean they sang one song and stopped. It means they were singing, continuously, actively, in the middle of their situation, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the darkest cell in the prison. And then Luke adds a detail so quiet it is easy to miss. The other prisoners were listening. The other prisoners, the people in the cells around them, the people who had every reason to be trying to sleep, or to be calculating their escape, or to be doing whatever people do in Roman prisons at midnight, they were listening. Something about two beaten men singing in the dark was more compelling than anything else happening in that building. And then the earthquake comes. The foundations shake. Every door flies open. Every chain falls loose. Not some of the chains, every chain. Not the outer doors, every door. The earthquake is total and specific, and it happens at midnight, while the singing is still happening, before Paul and Silas have done anything except refuse to stop. The jailer wakes, sees the open doors, draws his sword. Roman law was unambiguous. If a prisoner escaped, the guard responsible paid with his own life. The jailer looks at open doors in the dark and draws the only conclusion he can. They are gone, and his life is forfeit, and he would rather end it himself than face what is coming. Paul shouts from inside the darkness, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here. We are all here." In the middle of an open door earthquake, with every chain on the floor and every door standing wide, nobody left, not Paul, not Silas, not the other prisoners who had been listening to the singing. The earthquake that was supposed to free them became instead the thing that kept them in place long enough to reach a man with a sword at his own throat. The jailer falls trembling before them. "What must I do to be saved?" He and his entire household are baptized before the sun comes up. Now watch the pattern. Jacob wrestles in the dark at a river crossing and receives a name that could not have come in the daylight. Israel stands in the silence of blood-marked homes at midnight and walks out of 4 centuries of slavery before sunrise. Paul and Silas sing in a Roman prison at the exact middle of the night, and a jailer's entire household is brought into the kingdom before morning. 3 midnights, 3 impossibilities, 3 things that could not have happened at a more convenient hour. Here is what that means for you. The darkness you are in right now is not evidence that God has lost track of you. The midnight season, the one where the prayers feel like they are hitting the ceiling, where the situation has not changed, where you have done everything you know to do, and the morning still feels impossibly far away. That season is not outside the pattern of how God works. It is the pattern of how God works. John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish mystic who spent years in a prison cell, not unlike the one Paul and Silas occupied, wrote about this with a precision that has never been improved on. He called it the dark night of the soul. Not because the darkness means God is absent, but because the darkness is where God does the deepest work. The work that cannot be done in the comfortable light of easier seasons. The work that requires the stripping away of everything you were relying on besides Him. The earthquake does not come before the singing. It comes during it. That is not a small detail. That is the whole point. Paul and Silas do not wait until conditions improve to worship. They do not make a deal. God, if you open the doors, we will sing. They sing in the stocks, in the dark, in the middle of everything still being wrong, and the foundations shake while they are singing, not after. The midnight is not the waiting room before God shows up. The midnight is where He is already working. There is one more midnight, the hardest one, the one that should have broken everything and instead held everything together. The one in a garden where someone stays awake alone so that you would never have to face your darkest hour without knowing someone has already been there.
The garden is called Gethsemane. The name in Aramaic means oil press, the place where olives are crushed to release what is inside them. It sits on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem, close enough to see the Temple Mount from the hillside. Jesus has been here before. John tells us he came here often with his disciples. It is a familiar place, a quiet place, the kind of place you go when you need to think. Tonight, it is neither quiet nor familiar. He takes Peter, James, and John with him, and he says something to them that Matthew records with unusual plainness. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Not troubled, not burdened, overwhelmed. The Greek word is perilipos, sorrowful all around, encompassed by grief on every side, no direction to turn that does not face it. He is telling his three closest friends the truest thing he has said to anyone all evening, and then he walks further into the garden and falls on his face. My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. He does not dress this up. He does not perform composure for an audience. He is alone in the dark, face down in the dirt, asking his Father if there is another way. If the cup, the full weight of what he is about to carry, every sin, every wound, every midnight that every human being has ever spent or will ever spend, if that cup can pass. And then he adds the words that hold everything together. Yet not as I will, but as you will. He goes back to his disciples. They are asleep. He wakes them, asks if they could not keep watch for 1 hour, and goes back into the dark. Falls on his face again. Same prayer. Back to the disciples. Asleep again. A third time into the dark. A third time on his face. A third time the same words rising out of him in the garden while the city sleeps and the betrayer moves through the streets toward the gate. Luke tells us something happened in that garden that the other gospel writers do not record. An angel appeared to him and strengthened him, not to remove the cup, not to change the outcome or reroute the story or open a door the way the prison doors flew open in Philippi. The angel does not bring relief. The angel brings strength, enough to stand up, enough to keep going, enough to walk toward what is coming instead of away from it. And then Luke mentions the bloody sweat, hematidrosis, the condition where extreme psychological pressure causes the capillaries beneath the skin to rupture. And then he says something so simple, it is easy to read past it. Jesus rose from prayer. He got up. After 3 rounds of agony in the dirt, after the loneliest midnight in all of Scripture, lonelier than Jacob at the Jabbok, lonelier than Paul in the stocks, because Jacob at least had an opponent to hold on to, and Paul had Silas singing beside him, and Jesus has sleeping friends, and a dark garden, and a prayer that is not going to be answered the way he is asking. After all of that, he gets up, goes back to his disciples, and says, "Rise, let us go. The hour has come." The hour has come. Not the hour of defeat, the hour. The one the whole story has been moving toward. The midnight in Gethsemane does not produce an escape. It produces a decision. The most important decision in human history, made in the dark, alone, face down in a garden, while his friends slept and the city did not know what was happening. He could have left. John tells us earlier in the evening that Jesus knew exactly what was coming. Knew Judas would betray him. Knew Peter would deny him. Knew the cross was hours away. He could have walked out of that garden in any direction. Instead, he walks toward the gate, toward the torches, toward the sound of soldiers coming through the dark. Because the midnight in Gethsemane is the midnight that holds every other midnight together. Now the pattern completes. Jacob wrestles in the dark and is wounded and renamed. He limps away from the Jabbok with a new name carved into him by the night itself. Israel waits in blood-marked homes at Katzot, at the mathematical center of the darkness, and walks out of 4 centuries of slavery before the sun comes up. Paul and Silas sing in a Roman prison at midnight, and the foundations shake, and a jailer's household is saved before morning.
And Jesus falls on his face in a garden in the darkest hour of the darkest night and rises and walks toward the cross that will split history in two. 4 midnights, 4 impossibilities. One God who keeps showing up at the same hour. Not the hour of ease, not the hour of obvious possibility. The hour when the darkness is deepest and the morning is furthest away, and everything in you wants to believe that the silence means absence. That hour. Augustine, writing in his Confessions, describes his own midnight, years of running, years of restlessness, and says something that has outlasted everything else he wrote. Our heart is restless until it rests in God. He did not find rest at a convenient hour. He found it after the long dark, after the wrestling, after the prison, after the garden, after midnight. There are 3 things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: God has a long and specific history of showing up at midnight, not despite the darkness, but because of what can only happen there. Jacob could not be renamed in the daylight. Israel could not be liberated at noon.
Paul and Silas could not reach a jailer at a reasonable hour. Jesus could not make the decision that saves the world in the warmth of the afternoon. The darkness is not the obstacle to what God is doing. In every one of these stories, the darkness is the location where he does it. The second is this: the singing comes before the earthquake, not after. Paul and Silas do not wait for the doors to open before they worship. They worship in the stocks, in the dark, in the middle of everything still being wrong, and the foundations shake while they are singing. If you are waiting for your circumstances to improve before you can praise, you have the order reversed. The worship in the dark is not the warm-up act. It is the main event. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with longest. Whatever midnight you are in right now, the one that has gone on longer than you thought you could bear, the one where the morning feels like a rumor, the one where you have prayed the same prayer so many times you have stopped counting, you are not in that midnight alone. The Son of God was in a garden, face down in the dirt, asking if there was another way. And there was not another way, and he knew it, and he stayed anyway. He stayed and prayed and got up and walked toward what was coming, not because the darkness had lifted, but because he had decided that you were worth walking through it for. He has been in your midnight, not a midnight like yours. The specific weight of what you are carrying, the specific shape of what you are afraid of, the specific silence that feels like it will never break. He carried the full sum of all of it in a garden while his friends slept, and he did not put it down, which means that when you are face down in your own garden, asking if there is another way, wondering if the silence means you have been forgotten, you are praying in a place he has already been. You are in ground he has already consecrated with his own tears and his own voice crying out in the dark. You are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. You are not outside the reach of the God who shows up at midnight. You are in exactly the kind of moment he has always worked in. And the morning is coming. Not because the darkness was not real, not because the wrestling did not hurt, not because the garden was easy, but because in every midnight in this book, without exception, the darkness does not get the last word. Jacob limps into the sunrise with a new name. Israel walks out of Egypt before the morning star fades. Paul and Silas stand in an open-door prison while a family is baptized in the hours before dawn. And Jesus walks out of a garden toward a cross, toward a tomb, toward a morning that will not end. The night is real. The night is long. But it has always, in the end, been temporary. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words "still here." Just that, 2 words, because sometimes the most faithful thing you can do in a midnight season is simply refuse to let go, the way Jacob refused, in the dark, at a river crossing, holding on until the blessing came. And if you know someone whose morning feels impossibly far away, share this with them. Not because it will make the darkness shorter, but because sometimes the most important thing a person can know is that the God who shows up at midnight knows exactly where they are. We will see you in the next one.